Up next, we have a panel titled The Landscape of Investment in Agtech panel. I'm going to be handing the mic over to Kyle Scott, who is Managing Director at Conexus Venture Capital. Kyle is responsible for the firm's investment strategy and managing both funds, a 2019 Vintage General Tech Fund and Emmertech, a $60 million Agtech-focused fund. And I think he also sells Girl Guide cookies, so all of those things are super important. Kyle, I'll welcome you to the stage. Please welcome Kyle Scott. He's going to introduce and moderate this panel. There you go. Do you need a clicker?
No, I don't think so. We don't have any
Perfect.
slides. So. Oh, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. I'm going to awkwardly walk across the stage while I say hi. Very, very excited to be with you here today. We have three outstanding investors who we're excited to hear their insights and get their views on the market right now. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Scott with Fall Line Capital. He's one of the partners and founders. It's one of the top ag investment funds in the world, headquartered down in California. He's a longtime investor in farmland and technology, and he's also a farmer himself in Manitoba. So Scott, welcome.
Thank you.
Next, we'd like to introduce Jay Bradshaw, partner at Ag Capital Canada, a leading ag tech fund in Canada based out in Ontario. Jay is one of our friends who we refer to as a frenemy. We operate in the same area, investing in Canadian startups, but we're friends in the ecosystem and look forward to building it together. And finally, we have Laurie Dmytryshyn from PIC Group in Saskatoon. Laurie's one of the leading ag tech investors in the Canadian prairies and a dear friend of ours on a few different investments that we've made out of Emmertech to date. So welcome to the panelists. Please give them a round of applause. All right, so first, Scott, you've been investing in ag tech for a long time. Can you share with us what you're seeing in the North American ag tech investment community now, how it's similar, different, and how you've seen it evolve over time?
Yes, thank you. I want to maybe lower some expectations here because I am an agronomist with a farmland investment company, and we do some ag tech as well. So I have members of the team that are really the ag tech experts, and I get to play the role of farmer and diligence and discovery with the companies, but they have more understanding of the language and background. So as a company, we were created 10 years ago. So this question of going back 10 years is kind of appropriate for our history as well. And at the time, we were only focused on farmland investment in the United States with a focus on soil conservation. Ag tech wasn't even really a thing. And we were actually the very first day of the very first time I was in California, we went and visited these friends in a strip mall in Sunnyvale, and that was Blue River Technologies. And this was the culture of ag tech at that time. Really small startups, relatively unknown. We were friends with the guys at Solom that became Climate, and of course that was kind of the watershed moment for a lot of ag tech investing and attention. So over the 10 years, we've become much more focused on ag tech investing as well as farmland investment. And we now have this ecosystem of literally dozens, if not hundreds, of ag tech investment firms that didn't exist 10 years ago. And we're somewhat a fraternity now. We know each other, we know the strengths and abilities of many of these firms. So you have this culture now that has this incredible support for new innovation in agriculture that didn't exist 10 years ago. Specifically today, we are investing and focusing on what I call designer proteins. We're invested in a company that's making RNA pesticides, brand new investment in a company in Europe that's making peptides that facilitate or focus on the expression of genes. We have a CRISPR focus as well. So we have these designer proteins that didn't even exist as an opportunity 10 years ago. We have investment in a robotics company that seems to be now, that industry is focusing on hybrid away from autonomy. And we're making an investment in the near future in a carbon capturing and permanent storage system as opposed to sequestering. So those three focuses weren't even there 10 years ago. And that's exciting for all of us, I think.
It is, and just to see the amount of change as you articulated is out in the market, it's incredible.
Yeah, I come home to the farm in Deloraine, Manitoba to kind of unwind from all this, trying to even understand the technology, but it's amazing how relevant and useful it is to still have that farmer connection and farmer attitude when you're looking at stuff that is so complex and profound. You still need to know how that's going to be used on the farm, and we find that useful.
So true, so true. It's one of the things we always work with our founders to make sure that they are communicating with growers and farmers and the people who are actually using the technology and growing our food. Otherwise, it's hard to build products for them that are any use. So thank you. Thanks, Scott. Jay, I want to go to you next. You've been in the agriculture industry for a while with some of the best, biggest institutions that everyone here would certainly know. And now you're investing in startups. So I would love if maybe you could talk a little bit about your time with the likes of Syngenta and those sorts of things. And when you think about young startups, how those companies can begin to work with some of the super major players and how the super major players can be an important player in the ecosystem on that front in innovation.
Okay, thanks, Carl. A really good question, because I know a lot of ag tech startups, there's a big appetite and attraction to how can I work with the big players, right? Because that's what everyone wants to do. But I'll just share my experience in the agricultural sector for 30 plus years was seeds, traits, biotechnology, and crop protection. But most of those big global industry players, so the Syngentas, the Bayers, the BASFs, et cetera, Cortevas, they all have their own venture capital arms. They are at arm's length per se to the core parent company. They operate autonomously, but they all have a VC arm. And the rationale for that when I was on the inside of the organization was that every global company of the scale and magnitude that you described, Kyle, they all have a global strategy, they have a business strategy globally, they have a regional strategy, and they have a local country strategy, and hopefully all those things align. But the idea and auspice behind a separate, I'll say at arm's length VC, was that through a VC route, you could bring in and invest in other companies like ag tech companies or acquire companies that would complement and accentuate or catalyze the strategies of the big company, whether it's at a country level, region, or global level. So that's really why those VCs were formed. I will say for my startup ag tech colleagues in the crowd, it's probably not the place to start. One of those big, large companies, they say they might be involved in early stage, but my experience, I can't name any. So I'm not being critical of my former employer. They're more later stage. I say it's Series A and later. But the reason I wanted to tell you that dynamic is probably the answer, I think, Kyle, on how small ag tech startups can get involved. So if you take what I alluded to about the global, regional, or country level strategy and why a company like Syngenta, Bayer, BASF has a venture capital arm, that's where our local ag tech companies can get involved. So I'd say for a startup ag tech company, absolutely the most important. I'm a pretty pragmatic guy because people like Scott, it's all about the farmer. So I'm a pragmatic guy. So whatever you're working on in your startup, whether it's a product, a concept, whatever that is, make sure it's ground-proofed, it's trialed with farmers. You go through all the protocols and the iterations, make sure it's ground-proof and continue down that path. Because what you're going to do by doing that is you're going to create some interest and knowledge for these larger companies that like there could be something happening. The second important part, first, make sure your product works, I guess is all I'm really trying to say. Secondly, to the best of your ability with your network or Google, whatever means you have, try and figure out what you think is the strategy of those major players that Kyle outlined, whether it's a Syngenta, Bayer, or BASF. Because just like they're looking to their VC operation to bring in something that can catalyze or fit a gap in their strategy, they'll be looking at the same thing for you. So it's up to you as an ag tech startup to try and figure out their strategy, and mentors like myself can certainly help you with that. But if you can figure out their strategy and whatever product that you already have ground-proof, then you make the connection and say, I think I have something that will either fit a gap in your strategy, catalyze it, or actually take you into a different space. So I wanted to go through what the global companies, how they think, but if you just flip that upside down, if you have an interest in engaging with the major players, that's what I exactly do. But I wouldn't chase that early in your journey of developing a startup company. Make sure it's ground-proof. Make sure there's a tangible return on investment to farmers. And then after that, try and figure out the strategy of the larger companies.
I have to say that, so thank you, Jay. Jay and I have invested in a couple of companies together, and the perspective he's able to bring, having worked with some of those organizations and led some of them before, is it's second to none when you're working with those organizations. And the value, I guess I would just say thank you for joining us on the startup and early stage investing to be able to bring some of that insight and be able to share that with some of the companies. So, Laurie, I'd like to go to you next. You're one of the most active, most sophisticated ag investors on the Canadian prairies. If you could help articulate for us what are some of the challenges and what are some of the opportunities for companies that are born and raised out here in Western Canada?
So basically, first I just want to thank you, Kyle, for inviting me on this panel, but I'm with these very two smart ag experts, and I always tell people I know enough to be dangerous in this space. So you do have to kind of take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But in terms of the challenges and opportunities, probably I'll start with the challenges, and I think Jay just brought that up in terms of the ground truthing and the importance of ground truthing. But what we've seen in ag tech is that you have such a short window, right? You have sort of, you know, the crop window, especially on the crop side, where you have to get it right. And I think that's been a real challenge for a lot of different companies because you're almost time compressed in terms of your R&D and trying to convince the customer to use your product. So I think that would be a big challenge, just making sure that you're timing things correctly, that you're ready, you know, you've got your product out in the field and you're getting that feedback, and then you're starting that sales cycle right away too. So I think we've seen a bit of a struggle with respect to that. I think the second challenge would be in the area of data, and again, I'm new to this with respect to sort of ag tech, but you know, it's again, how do we get the data that the companies need? And we've got researchers at the university, we've got researchers in the federal and provincial government that are doing some great things, but how do we make sure we're collaborating so that our companies have access to that data? So I would have to say that's my two challenges. With respect to opportunities, I would have to say we're in the best location that we possibly can be, and we've seen that through COVID, we've seen that with respect to the war in Ukraine. We have something that the rest of the world wants. So again, I think we always have to be, you know, very, what's the word? We have to praise our farmers more because our farmers are big business. They're doing lots of incredible things. They're making tough decisions and they're relying on weather. So I think sometimes we don't give enough credit in that regard. And then in terms of the infrastructure, I'd have to say that's the second opportunity that we have. We have a great infrastructure here. We have organizations, we have all the commodity associations, we have a university which is doing leading world-class research. We have the food center on the value-added end. We've got a lot of really good things going for us. So I think we just have to learn how to maybe work together a little bit better sometimes.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think it's a perfect segue into our next topic, which it's impossible to be hosting an investor panel right now and not bring up some of the macro challenges that Laurie was just articulating. Everyone here, I'm sure, is aware of what's going on in the equity markets. There's out of control inflation, interest rates are rising, all of those sorts of things. And so while we have the investors up on stage here, would love just to get your perspective on what that means for agriculture and for ag tech, as well as from your vantage point. And Jay, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we're in a challenging environment. Everyone knows that, whether it's your personal household, you're an investor like we are, or you're a recipient of those investments. Everyone's under a little trepidation right now, and it's probably going to get a little more acute, to be really honest. If we have another interest rate hike here in July, that just accentuates what you're talking about, doesn't it, Kyle? For ag, I mean, as far as, you know, from an asset level, any asset with long-term cash flow reliance on that doesn't do very well in high inflationary times. And that's just intuitive, right? Because you just don't have the purchasing power you used to. So if you're a startup or an ag tech, whatever, you're in the seed stage or early Series A or whatever have you, cash is king, but it's not going to be worth as much as you think it is today. So you have to be very cautious about it. One thing I pay a lot of attention to, maybe not so much in early startups, but later phase startups, is working capital. The working capital that you have today on your income statement or balance sheet, whatever size you are, is absolutely critical to monitor and manage that, because with the parameters that Kyle outlined with interest rates and inflation, working capital is going to get it squeezed. So there's a lot of things going on right now, but I'm a pretty pragmatic, easygoing guy, and I go, hey, what you're talking about with your spouse and children and what's going on in the economy is absolutely no different than we were alluding to as an investor, and you should be discussing those things if you're trying to get investment. We'll see our way through this, but I do sense, and I've seen it tangibly, from the investor side in, a little bit more of a pullback right now. A little more caution. The valuations are coming down a little bit. The terms on a term sheet are a little bit tighter. The investors have, I have to make a decision between these 3 or 4 companies to invest in. It makes their decision easier, to be honest, because they're pulling back a little bit. And everyone's going to feel that. Everyone's going to sense that. I just think those that they're planning ahead, you work through the storm. If you're on a family and friends budget in your Agtech startup or your early seed phase, make that money work as hard as you possibly can, and delay a Series A if you possibly can, because right now in the next, even 6 or 8 months, Kyle, would not be a great time to be competing with others under this environment for a Series A. So, some of my comments.
Well said. Well said. Laurie?
I think the other thing, I agree with everything Jay said, but the other thing too is just supply chain issues, and I think the importance of planning is absolutely critical right now, and you're seeing some suppliers, they're asking for the entire amount up front, and so that's a situation we haven't seen before. Lots of delays, so again, I think it's critical that we keep in constant communication, not just with our customers, but also with our suppliers. I think we're in a different environment and we have to be aware of that. With respect to valuations, we are seeing that softening, but what I would say is maybe that's a good thing. And I know a lot of people won't be happy with that, but I think it's time that we kind of go back to basics a little bit, because we were pretty frothy. But I think really having that focus on revenues and sort of reducing your expenses, I think, is absolutely critical right now too. So it's like anything else, right? We have cycles. We're kind of going into a rougher time right now, and those companies that actually do have cash are in a better position. But again, I think we really have to focus on the opportunities with respect to sort of non-dilutive funding, like any grants you possibly can get. Right now is the time to make sure you have your grant strategy sort of ready to go.
Awesome. Thanks, Laurie.
You're welcome.
Scott, any final thoughts on this one?
As a farmer, I'm just shocked at the inflation we're dealing with right now. I think we got the anhydrous bill yesterday, and there's too many zeros on it. However, when you look at that in the context of agriculture, all of us are going through this same inflation pressure in food production around the world. And so we're low-cost producers for the most part. We stand to, weather this storm maybe a little better than others, and Agtech that improves those efficiencies, continues to drive those lower cost of production, is going to have even more significant value now than it was a year ago. And we got to keep things in perspective, because we're all going through this together. From a VC firm investing in Agtech, we're about to close a new fund on Agtech in 2 weeks' time, and it started off very enthusiastically. We're going to reach our goal, but this last few months has been a lot of work by our team that's been doing the fundraising, and we are changing some of our philosophy as well. We're not going to be keen on paying for infrastructure development. We're going to be putting more value on ARR and revenue at this point, whereas a few months ago that would have been less significant. So this is a change on how we're going to approach our investing as well. But we know we're all going through this together, and we have a chance here to actually maybe become more distinguished in the world of food production than even before.
I think that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that was sort of a theme across all three of the answers was, I feel like even at the early stage now for us, we see a lot more conversation around balance sheets. not as much as just around revenue and let's run out the OpEx and those. Balance sheets play a much bigger role in these kind of times right now. We're certainly seeing those conversations coming around.
One of the unique things about having a farmland fund as well is many of our investors were looking at farmland as a hedge against inflation. They have huge valuations on investments that could go to zero tomorrow, and they need something tangible that will always have value. So we have these two perspectives on farmland as a hedge against inflation, and then how do you manage technology in an inflation world? And we're going to be managing these funds separately, but it is a completely different mindset in the investors in both groups.
Yes, Laurie.
Just a quick thing, and actually just kind of thinking about that, what I've sort of seen too with respect to this environment is I think us investors will be smarter too, in that it's going to force us to work together more. Because I think we've always kind of, done our own thing, but I think now we realize, okay, a little bit more risky, we're better off collectively as a group. So I think that's maybe a bonus right now, kind of going into this next environment too.
Yep. Just a few more frenemies kicking around.
Yeah,
That's kind of the way
exactly.
it's working out, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so enough doom and gloom on all the macro headwinds that are coming.
Wasn't that gloomy?
So, what I'd love to hear from you now is where you're spending most of your time looking for transactions or looking for opportunities to deploy capital, and some of the areas that you're most excited about. And Laurie, I'd love to go to you first.
There's a couple different things, like obviously sort of, we partnered with you guys kind of in the AI machine learning end of things. I think that's definitely something, companies like Yuko Agro that we've collectively gone in on. I think we're really excited by those opportunities. We're also excited on the value added end. So there's not a lot of sort of investors in that food space, but we've just recently made an investment in 3 farmers, and so we kind of look at pulses as a massive opportunity area for us. So anything we can do to get that food product that's healthy, good for the environment, into the hands of consumers, I think that's an area that we're quite excited about. There's a lot of activity happening, and again, I know enough to be dangerous in this area, but the whole fermentation area. The food center in Saskatoon is just kind of working on a project in that area. So I think there's going to be lots of interesting things coming out of that too as well. I think those are the things that kind of get us excited. Again, we love Saskatchewan. We'll do anything that sort of impacts Saskatchewan in that regard.
Right on. Go to Scott next.
I had 23 years with Manitoba Agriculture, and I always think I'm a spy trying to bring technology and investment back to Manitoba. Even when I'm in Saskatchewan, I'm trying to steal stuff. I think, to explain our company a little bit, like I said, we were focused on farmland, and the Agtech were kind of, because we were based in Silicon Valley, we got invited into opportunities. We're a private equity firm. We were under the radar. We weren't really advertising. We didn't have a website that promoted this. And fortunately, we were involved in some really great deals. We were an early investor in Granular. We led the B round for Greenlight Bio, investors in Planet and Impossible Foods, Ripple, and so on. And now that we're focusing on Agtech as well, more in the public sense, we're actually seeing 2 to 3 opportunities a day. We will review 600 companies this year. That's how much Agtech activity is happening. I had a call from Serbia the other day, and then Dubai, Finland, Turkey, Iceland. These are all really interesting ideas. They're hard for us to manage when they're that distant, but the world of Agtech is just exploding, and so we are having to prioritize and figure out what we're going to focus on. And we like early stage. We initially were focused on technologies that impacted our experiences as broadacre farmers. We weren't involved in orchards or that sort of thing. Now we are branching out into that side of things. We're an investor in a company that's making a vaccine for swine from corn, which is really exciting. And it's our first foray into animal tech, which we think has a lot of opportunity as well. But looking at maybe some core areas, these designer proteins continue to be, really an incredible opportunity for fermentation as well. I've used the analogy with some of these designer proteins that when you're creating an RNA pesticide, it's like creating a weapon from ice that then melts to water afterwards and has no impact on anything else or no impact on the environment. And I see within a generation, a lot of our pesticides being incredibly effective and incredibly inert on the environment. It'll be a whole different marketing opportunity, and I really see that being a potential. And then, as I mentioned, our last investment, which may happen today or tomorrow officially, will be our first investment in this new carbon economy. And there's a lot of intangibles there. We're well aware of that. I found the contract where I sold my carbon credit to the Saskatchewan Soil Conservation Association 20 years ago for $1.85 an acre. I have that contract, 18-page contract. So history is repeating itself now. But obviously, there is a lot of resources and opportunity there. As long as we can define the rules and show the results, you want to be involved in that technology, and we also want to be involved on the farmland side. So.
Right on. Thanks, Scott. Jay, over to you. Areas that get you really excited to be deploying capital in.
Yeah, Ag Capital Canada, we're kind of a different beast, I'd say. We're a small fund. We're only a $26 million fund. We closed our fund in March of 2020 during the pandemic. Maybe after next week, we've announced 6 investments, so it's pretty diverse. It's aquaculture out on the West Coast in BC, aquaculture infrastructure, aeration, sustainable way of producing salmon in the ocean, doing very well. It's going to Scotland and Chile, so that's a fun investment. Move closer to where I live in Guelph, Ontario, P&P Optica. It's high-speed meat optical sensors that monitor the quality of meat and detect any foreign matter in poultry and beef processing. So that's going extremely well. One out on the East Coast, New Brunswick, is a Soma Detect, a very high technology in the dairy industry. So from sampling milk from each and every animal in a herd, and some of the herds under trial are 10,000 dairy cows. These are big herds. You can not only determine all the quality of the milk and fat, protein content, and so on. Their breakthrough, you could probably determine the pregnancy status of that dairy animal. So that's huge. So we have and we're involved in UCO as well, and that's lots of fun. But because the nature of myself, my other 4 general partners, we've cumulatively got about 175 to 200 years of experience in Canada, the ag industry, from all different touch points, distribution, commodity, my background, So once in a while, we like to act like entrepreneurs too. But because of the macroeconomic environment, Kyle, that you asked a question about earlier, we've got sight on some businesses where mom and pa and concepts say it's time to go. It's either pass it on to the next generation or exit the business. And they're core, good little ag businesses. Our GPs have a lot of knowledge and acumen. I know that's an anomaly in the ag tech world, but we've got our sights on a couple of those. And I think the economic situation has brought them to the forefront, but we're actually pretty excited about that. But on the higher ag tech, I think the sweet spot there, I like to call this a pull and a push. I mean, certainly the pull is from the farm gate, the consolidation of huge farms and all the costs, the risk mitigation involved. They've got to be extremely efficient on their farm. They need an ROI from every ag tech. Can't find as much labor as you want, so with the labor you have to be as efficient as you can be with the labor you have. All that is very conducive to a sweet spot on ag tech. And then to me, the push, if you look at all those major industry leaders that Kyle and I were chatting about, read all their annual reports, whether it's a machinery company, inputs company, fertilizer, whatever it is. They all have ESG goals and sustainability goals. They're in the public. They have milestones. They have to hit those. So as they supply the global and local agricultural industry with everything that they supply for inputs, there's this connotation of how is this going to be more sustainable or meet their ESG goals. There's a place there for ag tech to monitor that. And the ones that got all the power is the consumers and the households, right? They're voting with their wallets. Well, they're all into climate change. And all they know about agriculture is probably what they read in the social media. So there's an opportunity for all of us in ag there. But I call that another push. So how do you utopia for me in the ag tech space is how do you accommodate the pull by the farmer for the reasons I mentioned, efficiency and effectiveness of the farm? How do you satisfy all the global inputs that have sustainability goals? And how do you, to the best of our ability, satisfy the consumer with everything that's going on in their mind, like carbon credits you alluded to, and climate change? Well, if you can find the intersection of all those things, I think that's the sweet spot for ag tech. I don't know if I can figure that out, to be honest, and because that's a lot of convergence of a lot of different stakeholders. I'm more comfortable, and that's where we'll start, is on the pull side at the farm gate. What kind of ag tech is going to help the farm be more efficient and more effective with an ROI that's tangible? And that's where we'll start, but I think sometime the ag tech can converge into the central focal point I'm trying to describe, and that'll be a complete home run for ag tech.
I think you just brought up one of the most important words that we always talk about in agriculture is the stakeholders. If you look out across this room, we have growers, we have government officials, we have young startups, we have investors, we have all of the, and everyone here is a consumer. So we have all of these groups. So what I'd love just to ask is any final remarks for any of those specific groups or more broadly as a group, how you think ag tech is going to evolve, or some of the challenges that you're worried about, or some of the things that get you really excited. Just any final remarks for the group here. And Scott, I'd love to start with you.
Well, that's a broad question, I guess, and I think thinking of maybe giving some advice to startups in a way, you have this validation of what you're doing comes back to an ROI to the producer. For us, that's the most important thing. And you want to be driven and very focused as a startup to get things accomplished. But from our standpoint, some humility and flexibility will maybe get you further, because you're going to have to pivot in some of your focus at some point. There's very rare that a startup will do exactly what they say all the way through. So we need to have some indication from you as a great, innovative person to be flexible on what you're doing to get to those, get to that situation where it is providing more of a direct benefit to the producer. I think that's one thing. Maybe just, to be quick about that. Another thing I'll throw out for startups is these guys invested in UCO. We invested in UCO, but our UCO is in Israel and has developed gluten-safe wheat and peanut allergy-free peanuts. And there's a third UCO in Manitoba that's a chicken AI robotic system. So as startups, be really careful on how you name your little company, because you end up getting pretty confusing pretty fast if you haven't checked it out. And we have probably 3 of our startups that have done a poor job of renaming themselves, and we wish they would have checked it out beforehand. So I just throw that one out there too.
That is practical and specific advice, and I like that.
Yeah, take that one home.
Jay, I'd like to go to you next.
Yeah, the organizations and small startups like UCO and others that I coach and mentor and volunteer my time with builds off your point, Scott, is here's my advice. You can only grow your company as fast as the farmer lets you. I say that every day to the guys, and they're rolling their eyes, their hearts, and I say it every day when I'm in front of those teams. You can only grow your business as fast as the farmer lets you. And that builds off your point, Scott. When you have a prototype or protocol, you have to ground proof it according to the lens of the grower, your ultimate customer. And when you want to extrapolate on your product, your technology, or your portfolio, you want to build more value-added components, all that advice needs to come from the grower. And if you invite them into your world, we formalize grower advisory boards, and that actually, there's a good tactic. Check that when you need to do that. But you can do it informally too. But I'll just say it one more time because I'm already boring you, but you can only grow your business as fast as the grower lets you. And if you push too hard, and that's what Scott was saying, just using different words, if you push too hard and try and push something through a distribution channel, route to market, ultimately to the farmer, that doesn't meet his or her requirements for ROI, you're dead. And you only get one shot. So do it properly. The other tip is probably nothing we've talked about so far, Kyle, if I can. It's about good leadership. I'm a big proponent of leadership. And I coach my colleagues in the business I'm involved the same way, is that if you're an ag tech startup or startup of any nature in agriculture, whether you're an owner or co-owner, one of the first things you should do, you can do it in private, but you need to write it down, and don't show anybody if you're not comfortable, but be very, very honest what your core strengths are as an individual. Because you think if you're a lone owner, manager, CEO, if you think you can do everything required, not only to start up your company, but take it into success, you're wrong. You gotta admit, be humble. What are my true core strengths? And of course, what's equally important to write that down. You don't have to show anybody, but just acknowledge it. What areas, I'll call them weaknesses because it's a direct contrast. What are my weaknesses? It takes a bold person to do that and acknowledge that. But there's your little roadmap on the people side of what you got to do to build your businesses. I know what my strengths are, and putting myself as an example, but by golly, I know what my weaknesses are. I've either got to hire that, or I've got to find mentors to help me there, or the advisors I choose to join my board to fill out those gaps. And I'll leave it with a joke, Kyle, because at Syngenta I had, 300 or 400 employees. People say, why'd you have so many employees, Jay? They said, because I had so many weaknesses. I had to hire them all. So I'm just having a little bit of levity, but I truly believe that is one of the things that holds startups back, is the co-owners, founders, I'm just repeating myself, try to do everything and you can't. So early in the stage, acknowledge you can't. Be humble about it. Invite those into your organization, your camp, your circles of network that can help you.
I love the idea of you can only grow as fast as the farmer will let you, and if you don't surround yourself with great people who have complementary skill sets, both those things refer to removing ceilings on how fast and how large you can grow. I love that. Laurie, over to you for the final word.
Well, Jay just stole both of mine that I was going to talk about. So be close to your customer and basically know your weaknesses, and make sure to surround yourself with people that are better at certain things. But the other thing I guess that I will add off the top of my head is even, extend that to the investors that you end up taking on. With respect to the growth of your company, you want to make sure that you're not just wanting their money. You also have that ability as a startup to selectively pick those investors that can add value to your organization. So what I always say is we sort of, will be kind of interviewing startups, but they need to be interviewing us as well, and make sure that you are selecting that group that will be there when times are rough. And we've all been through it as investors. We've had lots of companies where, you're struggling to make payroll. What can you do? But where we've found success is when we have those entrepreneurs that are willing to say, hey, I need help. It's a tough question, but if you can keep that communication going with your investors, usually they'll be there to help you out.
Couldn't agree more. Some of our advice is always you need to find constructive partners, and you need to find helpful partners, and those should be criteria 1 and 2. And generally, whenever we're looking at a company or going through diligence, we provide a full list of every company we've ever invested in, regardless of outcome, tough time, good time, because they need to know us as well as we know them, and feel free to contact them and ask whatever you want. Like I don't need to facilitate, but you need to know who we are, because we're going to build a long relationship together. So I can't thank all three of you enough for taking the time and doing this, and please everyone give a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much for the time.